I think I made a big miscalculation with Latina voters last time around. I think I did not realize how many of them actually were specifically moved because they are, quote unquote, pro-life or anti-abortion.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, a lot more Latinos and Latinas were voting for Trump on this particular issue than I even realized. So,
Right.
So Tanya, what are the particularities in terms of how the Latinx community is perhaps being overlooked? Our complexity vis-a-vis reproductive rights is somehow being overlooked.
I think for a long time, reproductive rights have been framed from a very polarizing ideological perspective. You're either pro-life or pro-choice. But the reality is that many of our families don't find themselves in either box. And we have to be able to create that gray area because it exists. You know, we've learned from that Respect Albuquerque Women campaign we ran 6 years ago that it matters how you approach the conversation. It matters how you ask the question. If you ask somebody if they're pro-life or pro-choice, they're going to give you one or the other. But if you ask people, do you believe that women and families should make decisions about their whole entire lives, including abortion, for themselves alongside their families, they'll say yes. So I think it's critical for us to reclaim the framing of this conversation and get in front of the narrative that puts our families in this conservative box that doesn't fit.
We've covered this at Futuro Media. I just need to talk about America by the numbers. When you went out to Rochester, Maria, Black mothers are more likely to die in childbirth.
Right. So one of the stories that we covered on our public television series, America by the Numbers, was this story of toxic stress in African-American communities, Black women, Latina women, and how living in conditions of perpetual stress over decades, potentially centuries, actually has an impact on your reproductive health. And so some of these babies are dying to Black women and Latina women, impacted, in fact, in part because of toxic stress. You know, and toxic stress is kind of like stress that never goes away, you know, hunger, living in a violent community, you know, being a former slave who was, you know, being hunted down, and how that kind of gets embedded in your system. It's that kind of stress.
So, Regina, you've written about reimagining Black motherhood, right? In Rewired, mm-hmm. in Rewired.news, you wrote, and I'm quoting, "Since chattel slavery on stolen land, state actors have sought to control Black women's reproduction and ability to parent in one way or another." So tell us about those challenges specifically to Black motherhood and maternal health for women of color.
And I guess in the context, Regina, of, you know, what we're all witnessing, which is children of color being torn away.
That too.
Ripped away from their mother's arms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to include as part of this conversation the reproductive justice framework and the significance of saying that Black women not only have the right to parent and choose not to parent, but to parent in safe and healthy environments. And that framework is applied to communities of color broadly. And so the conversation around police violence and the way that Black mothers' children are being stolen by the police, and then what we're seeing along the border in the way that ICE agents are separating families. I mean, this is all connected. All of these oppressions are connected. But when you talk about the Black maternal health crisis, you know, you mentioned Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die while giving birth than white women. There's been a lot of coverage of this issue. Thankfully, it's been lifted up. A number of organizations have been doing this work for a very long time. Recently, the Black Mamas Matter Alliance has helped to lift up and amplify these stories. They've been covered in the New York Times and other places, highlighting this importance of doulas, talking about the birth justice movement, that a lot of people are empowering themselves and safeguarding pregnancy when Black women were never really given that right.
For the entirety of your lives, abortion has been legal. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
All right, so I'm revealing, right, my age. I was born at a time when abortion was not legal in the United States, which is why I'm like, okay, there's a generation of women who have lived with abortion as essentially the law of the land.
True.
And, you know, for me, this was I was a kid growing up in the political movement, the women's movement, and reproductive rights and abortion rights were central to this.
Yeah.
I have this memory of this one particular photo. I'm desperately searching for it. I thought it was in Time magazine, a woman in a fetal position in a pool of blood. But what we do know, and it may have been this same photograph, this photograph was in Ms. Magazine. It created a huge stir. The woman was Jerry Santoro. She was hunched over in a pool of blood in a Connecticut hotel. It was a back alley abortion. It was published 9 years after her death, less than a year after the passing of Roe v. Wade. And the headline for Ms. Magazine was Never Again. And the NARAL, Pro-Choice America Foundation, reported that before Roe v. Wade, an estimated 1.2 million women in the United States had illegal abortions every single year, and that as many as 5,000 women died in the United States every year because of having a bad abortion. So the thought that that there may be young women who end up seeing in their lives the fact that this could become illegal.
Wow.
And women have been needing and getting abortions since the beginning of time. Mm-hmm. And desperate women will resort to desperate situations. We know this. Many of us have been there. Desperation leads to desperation.
I mean, we are at a time where things like medication abortion, are accessible in a way that it wasn't before Roe. And so there is a lot of conversations around how to make it more accessible to people should Roe be overturned, because the majority of abortions are occurring at a time when people could take a medication abortion pill and terminate. So it may be a different time, but it'll be a time.